So I guess we are probably good to go. Does anyone know if we need to record or if this is all good to go? I don't know if the
Um,
session
As
organizer,
it is recording.
it is
yeah, I
recording.
think it's
Okay,
yeah.
excellent. Then I propose we set off. So I'm Sarah Jones from Géant. I'm one of the co-chairs of this group, and I'm here with Karina Pascu from the European Commission and Karen Payne. And we're going to speak to you about defining and classifying the Global Open Research Commons. So those are the kind of two areas of work we've been working on over the last few months. What I'll do, I'll just show you the next slide. We're going to have a brief introduction to the session. So just a kind of 10-minute presentation on the work we've done so far, the remit of the group, how we've defined the commons. And then we want to try and dissect that definition. So we'll have a little session with a Mentimeter to try and get your feedback on the definition we have. And then we'll talk about the typology that we have for the Global Open Research Commons as well. And we'll close the session thinking about where next. Karen already has a proposal as a BOF session later in this week about a new working group, which is about benchmarking the commons, but potentially there are other areas of activity that you're interested in too. So we can also have some general discussion about where we take this work next. So first off, the remit of the commons group, what we're trying to do is reach a shared understanding of what a commons is in the research data space. People use very different terminology. So in Europe, we talk about the European Open Science Cloud. In Australia, it's the Australian Research Data Commons. Others talk about open science platforms. But I think we're effectively all doing very similar work. So we want to try and get some common understanding about what that work is, the scope of that work, looking at ways that we can connect with others that are doing similar initiatives. So looking at both national infrastructure as well as regional. So in Africa, for example, the Wakran Group has a West African initiative called Libsenza, but they're looking to expand across the African continent. And also looking at how we can connect all of our work internationally. And the underlying reason behind that is to try and coordinate this delivery of open research commons so that when we set something up in Europe, for example, it's not a silo, it's something that can easily connect with other parallel initiatives around the globe. And also that the standards and the ways we define our interoperability frameworks can work with other similar initiatives. So that's what this group is trying to achieve. And we set it up as an interest group because I think there's some overarching discussion that needs to happen that will be a continual discussion to try and coordinate work in this space. But as you'll hear later on, we already have defined one working group to be set up from this. I suspect there'll be many others, and there'll also be overlaps with other activities within RDA that are looking at specific aspects such as metadata or PIDs, and we're actively trying to engage with those other relevant working groups and interest groups. So we've had a number of sessions. We initially ran 3 BOF sessions at different RDA plenaries or at the International Data Week. And then from that, we developed this idea for the interest group. We launched that in Helsinki. We had planned a session in Melbourne, which we ended up pulling because we were all in the throes of trying to organize like the restructuring and putting things online. But now we've done some work, and what we want to do today is to present that and to get your feedback on it. So first off, what is a data commons? We collected lots of different definitions. There are various, initiatives like EOSC or ARDC or the African Open Science Platform that all state, their mission, their terminology about what the initiative's about, what the commons is. There are also a number of kind of domain infrastructures that also have really useful definitions. What we did, Karen very helpfully pulled all of these definitions together in one document. And I went through and I abstracted various keywords to try and see what the common terminology was or what themes we could reuse when we're describing the role of the commons. And then we've had a number of iterative sessions where we've gone through to kind of reach consensus on a definition that didn't provoke too many twitches. We had quite a few laughs provoking twitches in Andrew Trelaw with certain words that he didn't like. But I'm sure there will be certain words that also, bring the fear out in other people. And what we want to do today is to go through that definition and see whether what we have as a working definition is good for all of you. So this is a word cloud that had come out from all of those different definitions. And you can see a number of the things that are highlighted there, things like e-infrastructure or science. Interestingly, some of those big buzzwords we didn't use. E-infrastructures we found was too specific to the European context. You have a similar term, cyber infrastructure, used a lot more in the States. And we also didn't really want to use a term science because we want to be as inclusive as possible. So the definition we reached for the research commons is that it's a global trusted system of systems that provides frictionless access to high quality interoperable resources, services, and artifacts for research. So this is what we came to in the end after kind of going through all the different definitions and trying to come to something that hopefully is agreeable to most. Now, I'm sure there are going to be terms in that many people don't like. And what we will do later on in the Mentimeter is try and see whether this captures the most salient points or if there's adjustments we need to make. So this is really a starter for 10. It's a straw man, which we really want everyone's inputs to rip apart. We also came up with a strap line, digital research resources for the common good, because I think it's always helpful when you're talking about, something as kind of nebulous as the commons to have like a quick one-liner which can be easier to really explain what it's about, why we have the commons. And we wanted to pick up on that idea of the common good. We also pulled together some information about how the commons should operate. So one of the things that came out strongly for us in many of those definitions was this set of core values. So we talked about the fact that the commons should be a community governed initiative that's driven by these core values, and it includes a number of elements. And this kind of starts to touch on the typology, which we'll go into in a moment. But you can see a diagram that we've taken here from ARDC, which was abstracted from the Open Science Framework. And again, this is very much open to discussion. And you'll note here that we didn't actually state the values that the Commons initiatives are based on. That's something that we want to get your input on this evening as well, or this morning, depending on where you are. The other aspect of work aside from the definitions was thinking about what are the core components or building blocks. And again, I can see a typo in my slide here, missing an A. We collated multiple diagrams from different sources from the NIH Data Commons, ARDC, the Canadian initiatives, for example. And we harmonized on those common elements to provide a basic shared description of what that infrastructure is. Now, I want to very briefly go through the inputs. Karina will speak about this in more detail later on, and we will have a specific session where we talk about the typology. But just to show you some examples, within EOSC, the European Commission had come up with these 6 EOSC action lines. So looking at the architecture, the data, the services, the ways in which we access or provide an interface to these things, the rules of participation, which I think are really critical to know what's expected of the users or providers within a certain commons, and the governance. And as we've been running the EOSC Executive Board, the Sustainability Group has brought up the model on the right-hand side of the screen, talking about the fact that we have an EOSC core, so some kind of underlying services that are critical to make EOSC operate. And then what we're doing is federating the data and having a series of services in what we call the EOSC exchange layer. So you've got services that can act on that federated set of data. Another model, which actually in some senses mirrors that kind of core and federation model from EOSC, is the NIH Data Commons Stack, which came from Vivian Bonazzi. She talked about having compute as your base layer, bringing all your data together, and then having a set of software services and tools that can act on that. So having an app store or all of your analysis and workflow tools, all of your APIs. Another view, kind of looking at the kind of network stack, again, looking at a number of layers here through which we may access data and services, and some of the kind of overarching components that we need this engagement with stakeholders, we need good governance, we need standards that cross-cut through all of these different layers. And just two more, I will share these slides, so if anyone wants to look at the models in more detail, you can. The Canadian model here, and this has come from Mark Legger and the initiative they have there, you can see again a number of core elements. So they're various different repository systems, having interoperability between these repositories and all of the services, having again the network and the compute as a kind of layer at the bottom that makes everything work. And then having a number of things like FAIR as kind of basic standards or principles that kind of go around all of this infrastructure, all of the international standards and best practice. And that mirrors one of the concepts in EOS that we have this interoperability framework as really the glue that fits everything together. And the final one, I'm sorry that this image is a little bit grainy on a bigger screen. It's because it's come all the way from Oz. This is the ARDC stack where you can see they've got the underpinning infrastructure, their different data assets, all of the national infrastructure, and then all of the analysis tools. And you start to see some common elements coming through all of these different models, that you have this kind of base level infrastructure, and then you build on that with your data and your service layers. And that's what we've tried to represent. This is not a very finessed diagram. We definitely will get more graphic support, but we really liked the kind of service stack that had come out of the NIH work. And what we thought was missing there was thinking about bringing the human elements together with those technical elements. So making sure you've got the governance elements, the stakeholder engagement, and some sustainability. And there are some kind of principles that come out of our work that, you know, we really don't want to be building silos. We want to make sure that any commons that's being developed in any kind of region or national context can interoperate with others. So that those aspects of like the interoperability layers, the APIs, making data as open as possible, are really kind of core, I think. And we probably need to visualize that better to show that there are some essentially some glue that connects all of these different infrastructures together, and being able to avoid vendor lock-in, that we should be able to fork to new infrastructure wherever needed. So that's what's come out of our work so far. And what I want to move on to now is to look specifically at the definition that I shared first off. So if people could go to the Mentimeter, so menti.com, and this is the code to enter. Let me see if I can copy that and I can paste it in the chat. I think I'm going to have to just come out of the slides to do that. Thank you very much, Karen. You're there before me. So if we go to the Mentimeter, the first question we have, we've got some, essentially we want to walk you through our process of defining the definition. So we have a series of questions to really just see which terminology works best for you. And then we're going to go into our definition and try and unpack that and see which terminology is good or bad, or things that you know, give people certain twitches. So far, we've only had one answer so far, but there's a preference for the federated system of systems. That's something that I like as well. Portal was something that wasn't as liked in the EOS context, just because of, I think, some baggage with that. Set of tools, applications, and data. I think, yeah, that's also a very clear description of what it is. It's interesting that people like the e-infrastructure and cyber infrastructure. That's one that we'd been worried the terminology was a little bit too focused on one kind of national context. But I'll give this a couple of minutes to run through to see which kind of terminology. I see people like ecosystem as well. I also find that a good term. I know some people find it a bit too life science context sometimes. But the federated system of system and the set of tools is winning out so far. And I think that ties quite well with with the way we were going with the definition. We were trying to keep things, language as clear as possible. So trying to avoid anything that's too much jargon. It's interesting that people don't like platform. That's one that I personally had thought was quite an open term. But I think that idea of federation and systems is a good one to stick with. Okay, I think 20 is probably, there's a couple more coming in, and we will keep this open if people want to still give responses there. But I think we're probably through most of the people in the group here. So I'm going to move on to the next question. Already I see some people have answered. Now, we would like everyone, you're limited to 3 responses here, so you might want to read them all first. But the question is asking, what are the core values? Now, you'll remember we didn't define the values. We wanted to see what the common views on values are. So I see some people on open, most on trusted, which is interesting because trusted was one that we were all very strong on. A few on standards-based, cross-border, distributed. So again, this is picking up the notion of federation. Consensus driven, got a couple of votes, none for communal or collective action yet. But again, trusted and open, getting more votes. I'll let this go through to 20 odd again. So still trusted on top, which is good. I think the trust is really critical in these initiatives. And in terms of what we're doing within EOSC, a lot of the work we're doing around things like trusted repositories or, having rules that ensure that the services have good governance also picks up on that element of trust, being able to trust that the data are valid and also that the services are sustainable. It's interesting to see how many people talk about open as well, because I know for some communities, open is difficult, but I think we all get the best value when we can be open with our data. And even if it's not with the data per se, I think we should be open in terms of, the way in which we operate the commons, being transparent in the work that we do and enabling the engagement in that. So that's good. The open, trusted, and standards-based, they probably would have been my top 3 as well, or maybe community governed. It's hard to pick 3 out of the 10. Okay, so that's very helpful. I'll go through to the next question, which I see some people have answered already. There are a number of options here, so it takes a while to read them. But we were also thinking about what's the main purpose of the commons. This came out in a lot of the definitions. We didn't include it in ours because we didn't want to restrict ourselves to one thing, but we did think it would be interesting to poll people on this. So the first one, the ability, enhancing that ability to find, share, and reuse content, advancing innovation, getting the top result so far. I think for many funders, this is why they're investing in this kind of infrastructure. They want to solve the grand challenges. They want reuse of data across different research communities. Increasing research productivity is getting a fair rating as well. I'm actually quite pleased to see that this last one's got the lowest rating. Increasing access to results by those who pay for the research. I think that's one Andrew Trelaw had added, and I'm hoping he was putting that in there as a slight joke. But yeah, it's good. Enhancing the reusability of content kind of across disciplines, and productivity and science coming out as the top ones there. So I'll give this another couple of minutes to go through. Let's see what time we're on, 20 past. So we've got till past on this section. If anyone wants to comment as we go through as well, by all means unmute. We're a small enough group that if you have reflections on the results that are coming up, I'm fine for you to just unmute and chat. So I'll jump through to the next one. Now, what we want to do to kind of close this session is to pick up on our definition specifically. And I'm actually, just for convenience sake, as we go, I'm just going to type this into the chat so we all have a reference. So it's a global trusted system of systems that provides frictionless access. It's amazing how we labored over the different words. To high quality, and that was a debatable thing as well. What's quality for one person might not be for others. Interoperable resources. These words at the end, resources, services, and artifacts also caused a lot of debate. I'll pop this definition in the chat so you've all got a reference as we go through the next couple of slides. What we now want to understand is which words you like, which you don't, and what's missing from this definition. So we've got three kind of questions that first off we'll do word clouds, and then it's a kind of open text. So if you look at this definition and just think about the words there that either speak to you or that make you twitch, perhaps. And our first question is, which words within this do you like? So I see people like interoperable, frictionless, global, trusted. Yeah, I would agree with all of those. I think the interoperability is really key. The trust, we saw that come out as one of the really, the top values. Again, I'll give this a few minutes to go through so we can see which words get the biggest score. Quality coming up a couple of times there as well. Open just once, I think. The system of systems is liked as well. But trust, interoperable, global, and frictionless. I think the usability is actually a really important angle here. Like it's got to, whatever we provide for researchers has to make their lives easier. So it has to be frictionless access. We can't have, login issues and difficulties, getting to data or applying the services to the data. Good. So I think we're getting quite a clear picture there. The quality is maybe coming up more highly now because we've got it in a few places as high quality as well as quality. So that's slightly bigger than the rating you would see with the one word there. Excellent. Okay. Now the next question is about words that make you wince. System of systems makes one person wince. Another person liked it. Frictionless made somebody else wince. Artifacts, yeah, artifacts is a difficult one. Where it's essentially what we've converged on in EOSC, but I'm not 100% convinced there. Trusted is one that's also not liked. I mean, I think for any of these terms, there's going to be some things that people like and some people don't. I'm just noticing there's a comment in chat from Gabby. I believe that open science and its various dynamics should be increasingly tied to the development of society, therefore increasing community participation, shared control, and the collective creation of knowledge. I actually wholeheartedly agree with that. This is why we called the group the Commons, because we want to pick up on that notion of common good and that collective action and co-creation. Because I think it has to be something that it's not a case of, one group top down providing, for another user. It has to be a joint undertaking or a joint initiative. So I see quality or high quality coming up. So high, maybe this qualifier for the quality, the fact that there's some kind of standard level is maybe problematic. And that actually ties into some of our discussion, because we were talking about, that it's fitness for purpose, really. Something that might be a low quality resource in one community is actually sufficient for another person's use. So it can be problematic to kind of say, is this high enough quality? Okay, interesting. So yeah, some of the things like system of systems might seem a bit buzzy, or artifacts or frictionless might be difficult. Now, the final point I want to come on to here around the definition is what's missing. So first comment here, if we use federated we need to eventually look at what that word means. So coordinated services, interoperation doesn't necessarily require standards. It can involve common choices, confidence in the standards used. Yeah, I think it has to be a suite of standards. I see a nice suggestion from Maria in the chat actually that we should maybe use seamless instead of frictionless. I think that's probably a better term than frictionless. Seamless access, because it suggests, very straightforward. Standards are missing in that definition. The public, something about the benefits or the added value. Yeah, they're, like you say, they're in the strapline, but they're not in the definition. We were worried about packing too much. We wanted essentially like one sentence, but I think we maybe need a suite, like a building definition, like what is the commons at a base level? Why are we doing the commons? So what is the purpose behind it? And maybe the strapline. So hopefully we can encapsulate all of that across these definitions. Common goods, commons, the public good. That's what we tried to capture in the strapline, that this is about the overall benefits. Standards are different, Mark saying, for different communities. We need that flexibility. Absolutely. It can't be, one standard to rule them all. You never have that work. I'm afraid I don't speak Spanish, but this is about access to data, I think, from my very rudimentary understanding, and services, benefits of services, maybe. High value or valuable rather than high quality. Or potentially, I don't know what people think about fitness for purpose. That's the term that Andrew had been pushing rather than quality. I don't know if that speaks to people or not. By all means, add in chat or elsewhere if you want to make comments on that. Innovation friendly. So, yeah, supporting research at the edge. Definitely. Some data types need to be restricted. It's not always open. That's definitely something we've been covering within EOSC. So even though it's got open in the acronym, it can't just be open data. Inclusivity, again, I think this maybe comes to some of those core values, that it's about, being consensual, doing things for the common good, being inclusive of all of the stakeholder communities, being inclusive in terms of the standards that we use. And this by and for, that's actually a phrase I like a lot. That, this is by a certain community for a certain community, that it's something that's led by them. Francoise is just saying you've been using seamless access in the astronomical VO for circa 20 years. So maybe seamless is a better term than frictionless. Legal frameworks, yeah, we didn't state that in the definition, but it's certainly something that needs to be encompassed in the commons. Okay, I think we're actually at past now. So that's given us the intro and actually some very useful data from all of you on initial reactions to the definition. I know you didn't really have that long to look at it. I would encourage you to share this Mentimeter with others, because we do want to get lots of views on what's working and not, and refine that definition more. But what I will do, I'll stop sharing now and I'll let Karina take you through the kind of typology that we've been working on. And then we just have some open questions for discussion around that.
Thank you, Sarah. Just I'm trying to, let's see, share my screen.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess you can see it. I'm going to
Yeah,
make
we
it.
do. We do.
Yeah. So actually, Sarah just walk you through this past history in our interest group. It's this is kind of a evolution into our shared understanding of this global open science commons, and it's a journey that we started back in 2019 in Berlin. And then we continued with the session in Gaborone, and then more sessions in Philadelphia, and another one in Beijing last year, where we try to understand a little bit from the case studies and to get a better understanding what we're aiming at in terms of a typology, some common elements, how to define a typology of research commons. In CODATA last year, we had a thorough discussion with many experts, some of them coming from UNESCO, from CODATA, and from Asia Pacific regions, to understand a little bit the differences, the differentials and how the issues are in the Asia Pacific region compared to what we started with in Europe with the European Open Science Cloud, in Australia with ARDC, and in Canada with research data. And then last year we launched the interest group in Helsinki, and we talked again about framing our work, and we decided to have some kind of we stick for the time being on the research commons, and then with looking forward and ahead towards global open science commons in the future. So here we are today with this interest group, and Karen would would lead another both later on the 12th of November, I believe, on the international brainstorming of these initiatives, so that we discuss how this initiative compare to each other. The initial framework that we came with in Philadelphia, and we tried to validate later on, consider several dimensions, such as the type of the commons that we're talking about. It could be a commons, it could be a platform, it could be a cloud. What would be the coverage? Some of them are national. A number of them, like the EOSC, it's a pan-national, or the African Open Science Common. And then the architecture, whether they are a federated cloud, like it is the case of European Open Science Cloud, the National Research Data Platform, or even clouds. And then what would be the data discovery and the access interface, because we're talking about discovery of data, and what would be the services building on this data, and the skills, and also the fact that we need skills and training for scientists and data scientists and data stewards. And we also need the social dimension, the community engagement. And a part of that, we need sustainable business models, and the governance dimension, which is not sometimes very obvious how to achieve a part of EOSC. There's some other commons platform or clouds that do not have this governance element inside. So I gave a sample of platforms here, the pan-national, the regional. Sarah also mentioned before, like the European Open Science Cloud and the African Open Science Platform. And then the national one, like the German NFTI, in Australia, the ARDC, and then the Chinese cloud, and in Japan, NIIR, and in Canada. But there are also a number of domain initiatives like the IVO-A, the observatories, and in United States, the National Health Data Commons. So Sarah also presented the common elements that we identified for typology of research commons, that has to do, these elements have to do with technical elements like software, data, and the compute platform, the underlying compute platform, the cloud, so to speak, the cloud. But there are numbers of other elements like governance, human elements like skills as well, and stakeholder engagement, and the business models, and particularly the sustainable business models. The questions for this subsection would relate to the question is, does this typology works for you, or are there some other elements that we missed? And in what other areas do we need to collaborate and to build consensus? And this is on globally. So, for instance, it could be skills and training. It could be a fair object ecosystem. The ecosystem has been mentioned before. Then we can have data stewardships, or whether we need more areas to for collaboration like data repositories or analytical tools. In the area of incentive skills, do we need to do some landscaping to understand what is there, what exists, where are the strengths, where are the gaps? And this we need to do across platforms and across all commons. And particularly, we need to understand what are the skills that we need for at a global level. And also, what kind of governance model do we need to be followed nationally or regionally, and also at the global level? And what could be the features that this model could have? But most importantly, we think that is to get understanding how to connect these national-based or domain-based commons with the pan-regional or domain discipline-based ones. So this interfacing, this is an interface that we need to understand how we can build and what we can do with it. So that would be all on my side.
Excellent. I think if
Yeah,
you're able to keep the screen share on just so we've got that list of questions, that would be really
right.
helpful. What we
Okay.
would like to do now, we felt it was a bit difficult to kind of do an interactive thing around this commons typology. So we actually just want to invite people to reflect on these questions. So raise your hand or just speak out. I'll open up the participants panel so I can see who would like to maybe make contributions. Was that Francois's hand going up? Do you want to comment, Francoise?
Yes, I put a comment on the chat also. I think that it's much more specific than what you have written here, but it's a real question which we saw appearing in the EOSC Executive Board Fair Working Group when we discussed about metrics. We have tried to extract possible metrics from the RDA, Fair Data Maturity Model, working group results about metrics. And we really thought that it would be good to try, and we have a stepped approach about metrics for EOSC. And we really thought that it would be good to discuss which kind of metrics are essential in the context of the commons. And the only place to do that is this group, or a working group coming out of this group. So,
and the way I see this working, so this kind of reflects on something else that I've been putting in the chat in response to Matthew. We set up this interest group because we think, I mean, the remit of this is so huge. You know, like the idea of building the commons and implementing it is kind of like all of the elements of RDA together. You know, like all of the components of the commons probably have their own working groups already, things around the legal interoperability or around the PIDs or, you know, around the compute, how we're moving data, how we're, you know, defining the different data types. So there's lots of elements that are already going on. And I think this group has to work very hard to connect with those existing interest groups and working groups. Potentially, what we need to do is work with them to look at a certain aspect of their work, like the legal interoperability, in the context of the commons, or maybe they're already doing things that are relevant, or maybe we need to spin out working groups, you know, under the umbrella of this commons working group. And with the fair data maturity model, as you said, Francoise, they're now coming to the end of that group. In EOSC, we've taken their work, we've made a recommendation on how we'll implement it within EOSC. That potentially, like the actual implementation of that, could be a discussion point either underneath this interest group or as a group of its own right. Because I agree with you, I think we need to try and coordinate and align as much as possible. And potentially, you know, if other people are moving into looking at fair maturity and metrics, it would be good that we're doing that in a parallel way, and trying to be as coordinated as possible. I don't know if you want to speak back to that, Françoise, or if that
Yes,
answers your
what I
question.
would like to say is that it's something, the basic metrics are discussed in the Fair Data Maturity Model Working Group.
Yeah.
And they are in maintenance mode. So I think that they could be the place where feedback from the discussion around the metrics for the commons can go if there is a need to adjust, to update the metrics themselves. But the idea here is to extract, because obliging, if you discussed about inclusiveness before, openness and so on, to oblige everybody to be fair like it is in the metrics of a fair data maturity model, even just the essential things. It can be an issue, and the essential things cannot be, there may be a lack of some essential things for the EOS or other commons needs. So I really think we have to adopt the fair data maturity model and to see what we extract from it, and then to provide feedback to the Fair Data Maturity Model Working Group.
Yeah, definitely. I see there are two
just
other
a comment
hands.
on
one, Karina.
Yeah, it was one comment in the chat on the issue of legal frameworks for sharing data. Coincidentally, we had the same issue coming up from the work in the G7 Open Science Working Group. This is a working group under the G7, one configuration working on open science since 2016. And this is one of the issues that came up from our work as well. So it's an important issue as well, this legal frameworks for data sharing.
Yeah, excellent. Okay. So Matthew, I think you had your hand raised first. Do you want to come in next?
Beat Kathleen. Thanks for this. I find this really, really fascinating. I think there's so much value in this because it is kind of an interest group existing on a level that brings together a lot of different pieces. And so my question in the chat, and I'll just reiterate it, and you sort of already answered it, so I apologize for saying it again, but it's the extent to which this group is trying to advance something on its own, or it's kind of pulling these pieces together, identifying what either exists in the work that's already been done, or where other working groups are working to pull things together. Because I think ending those, a lot of work going on in silos, and this could be a group that pulls some of that together in a coherent piece to advance that global knowledge sharing. So that was my main point. The other one I just say, and one of the words I put down as making me cringe, and it's not really fair, but I put the word communal, and not because I don't think it, and I want to explain why. Not because it's not crucial to this endeavor, and it's obviously crucial to the way RDA works, but at some point, the legal framework top-down issue becomes a really important barrier. And we're engaged in a collaboration on the open research area with the EU, and then GDPR requirements suddenly become a real block because, of course, Canadian government doesn't want us agreeing to implement European privacy standards, even though our standards aren't that different. We can't say we will do so. So some of those issues, and I know other groups are looking at them, are very top down, but really crucial to the ability to actually have fluid flowing of data.
Yeah, that's a really, really important point, actually. So to address your first point, this very much is meant to be coordinating. That's why we chose an interest group rather than a working group, because we were at first saying, okay, well, shall we do a working group that has a limited focus? And then we thought, well, actually, this is not going to be fixed in 18 months. It's an ongoing discussion that's going to take a long time. And it also intersects with so many other aspects of what RDA is doing that we really wanted something that is about that coordination, about pinpointing existing activities that we can draw together and build on and see where there's a gap and where needed, establish a new working group with a set remit to enhance that. And then, as you said, actually, that's a really useful response around communal, because there are various things when we've been talking about the typology. There are some things where we can very much collaborate and go for global agreements. And there are other cases, around things like the governance models or the legal frameworks, where it is going to be very much there is national or, European-wide jurisdiction, and you can't, it's a blocker. So you have to go by your own agreements there. So maybe that idea, of communal needs to be as communal as possible, like this, as open as possible, because there will be times where it just really can't be. We can't come to consensus. We have to do what is the actual framework in our own country or our own context.
Although I'd also say this group could be one that pushes not to change legal frameworks, but to recognize those areas of commonality and say, look, let's just have some common sense here and agree that we can recognize a certain level of commonality perhaps and run with that.
Yeah, definitely. Kathleen, do you want to come in?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've been, as you know, working on international alignment of repository networks for many years, and one of the challenges I think that's really important to acknowledge and address at the beginning is, the capacity level and the different levels of capacity in different regions. So if we really want to talk about like a global commons, then we need to set the bar at a certain place where different kinds of regions can participate. So I think that's something that's a really sensitive issue for many countries that have less resources. And so what I caution about is having, for example, the EOSC be the leading partner that defines the interoperability criteria, because there are so many countries that are not able to implement the kind of things that are being implemented in the EOSC because there's so much funding in Europe right now around this. So again, like if we're looking at a global knowledge commons, we really need to bring in those other partners that have different types, access to less resources to help them define what is appropriate in terms of interoperability for them.
Yeah, that's again a really important point, and I hope that's a way in which RDA can give us the platform to do that. We have, I think we've got chairs from 5 or 6 continents, but you have to actually engage the discussion in the global south and in other areas where there's not as much representation. Edith, I'm going to mute you, or if you could mute, that'd be good. So yeah, we do need to make sure that it's not, the Western or kind of, richer countries leading a discussion and others being left behind. And I think that's something that RDA, is part of the RDA mission, to be a leveler in that way. Now I see RDA is also raised a hand. I assume that's Hillary. Do you want to?
Yes, it's me. Hello. No, I just wanted to, I think it's a good time to state, because I agree with what Kathleen says, and then Matthew, and I'm also fully aware that these are volunteer groups, but I think it's important to tell you that as part of the European funding for the Research Data Alliance, so it's, its focus, if you like, in Europe, one of the activities that RDA has been asked to coordinate is the internationalization. So that connection, bridging between what is happening in Europe with the European Open Science Cloud, but also ensuring that the international aspect is there. So clearly the Global Open Commons or Research Commons Interest Group is very fundamental to that. We have, hopefully this should start in March, and therefore we would have funding to support that, because I realize that the capacity is not. So it's something to discuss with the chairs, of course, but all the rest of the people in the group, but also to try and give you the opportunity, maybe not to limit, because the focus of the activities could be broadened, and due to this important, if you like, activity that we expect to hear that will be supported from the first.
And in terms of the support, there aren't restrictions on that being like for European participants, or no? Okay, that's really good to hear, because I think certain countries like, Europe, there is already a lot of investment through EOSC. So if there's a way we can direct funds to broaden that into a more international participation, that would be great.
Yeah, now the international part will be run by the European Office of the Research Data Alliance, but we have scope there to support the activity, and the idea would be to work out what's the best way to use that funding. I think if you're referring to the open call, Sarah, the open call probably will be directed to Europeans. I'm not sure. We haven't heard the restrictions on that, but we've still ring fenced funding and quite a considerable activity for the internationalization aspect. So
excellent. That's it's interesting. I was chatting on a call earlier than this with one of the other partnership agreements, one of the other EPAs, and they were talking about standards and their plans in their kind of fair work package about defining standards, and all of this is like work within the international community. They were working on chemical data, and I think being able to work internationally through groups like RDA to define those standards and to embed the adoption, I think, is really important.
I mean, it's just, sorry, not to go on, but just to consider it, how you feel could be as you work through all the things, or how we can best leverage this, can come in the format of editorial support and secretariat support for your actual group. It can come in the form of the facilitation of meetings, perhaps travel if we ever do that again, things like that. But it's all. So create your shopping list there, and we'd be very happy.
Excellent. Thanks very much, Hilary. Edith, would you like to raise a question or comment?
Thank you. I'd like to suggest that the common.
Your audio is very poor. It sounds like you're Darth Vader. Maybe unplug the headset. It's still poor audio. It's comical audio. You're going to have to listen back to this recording. Try again. Oh. Do you want to try again, Edith? It sounded like it might be better. We got a slightly different sound a moment ago before you muted. No, let me just see. There might be something in chat. Just that the Darth Vader is interesting. Apparently, I went very squeaky in a call the other day. My headset conked out halfway through, and I sounded like I was a high-pitched 7-year-old. So Edith's just putting in chat, we should collect the differences. I think this actually might pick up on a point that Mark Dietrich had made earlier on. I'm just going to read from the chat. Just that it might be useful to shift focus from creating the kind of grand concept of the global open research commons to start by cataloging existing connections against the typology. So if the virtual observatory, for example, is trying to work with EOSC, what are the points of interoperation or interface, what's being agreed jointly, and conversely, where do the two sides need to go their own way? And I think Françoise has put in the chat, this is actually something precisely what we're planning to do at the moment. We had a fair working group discussion the other day where we were looking at use cases to go into our strategic research and innovation agenda. And we thought we'd look at the IVO against the current EOSC interoperability framework and see, to what extent they map. Where would it be possible for IVO to federate into EOSC to be part of, the commons? And, are there any particular conditions or restrictions that would make that problematic, so that we can then start to understand at a practical level, where those challenges or gaps or needs to be separate are. And I think the more we can do those kind of practical use cases, the better. Françoise, I don't know if you want to comment on that at all. I think you had put something in chat. Just look down. Françoise, yeah, you got your hand up. Do you want to speak?
No, yes. It's just to comment on what you said. I tried to explain the point in the chat. We have an operational global open interoperability framework at the disciplinary level. And the idea is to understand how to interface it properly with EOSC, in particular to get access to resources provided by EOSC. For instance, eventually AI or computing or some things like that. But I insisted on seamlessness. So I say as seamlessly as possible interfacing with EOSC. So I think that there is no solution. We are studying this in one of the European projects, and we are working on it. So there is no, I don't have the answer now, but we have to see how to do.
Excellent. Thanks for the clarification, Francoise. Edith, your hand's still raised. Do you want to try and speak out? It's not unmuting, so I'm guessing not. And I see some more comments have been put in the chat from Edith, just that we should collect the differences, which ties with the same point, and then group them by elimination, managing, or can we manage something? Can we live with it? And a minimum viable product is good enough. Perfect does not exist. Yeah, I think, I mean, you can never please everyone all of the time, and given the breadth of some of these commons initiatives, so in Europe obviously we're working across multiple countries, all different research disciplines, there's never going to be a good fit. There's always going to be some things that are like not ideal for certain communities, so you've got to try and come to the common denominator. Carsten's also put a question in the chat. Could it be possible to have some milestone steps so we don't run the risk of an endless gap analysis? It's a very huge subject to cover. Yeah, definitely. So this is partly why we defined an interest group and have focused initially on really just starting the discussion so that we can get a definition, we can get an understanding of what are the building blocks, and then we can maybe address one building block at a time. And I think, as I was mentioning before in response to the questions about legal interoperability, there will be existing activities. And I think what we need to understand is whether we can hook on to existing working groups and do something in collaboration, or if they've already done a part of the work. But I think what I would like to see is that the gap analysis, or the identification of potential areas of work, is an iterative thing. It's not a once-off. It's something where we identify a priority, we work on it, and these working groups, go in succession. There might be a couple running at a time. It might be that we have a little flurry at a certain point in time. But I mean, I don't want to do a massive mapping now because the area is so huge, and I don't think it's helpful that by the time we get around to doing the work on all of those, things will have moved on. So I think we need to identify some areas of work and practically start on those, and use the interest group as a way to continue the discussion and to identify what are the next biggest priorities to work on. And looking at the clock, that's actually maybe a good time for us to move on to the final phase of the discussion. We already have one example of a working group that's setting up. There's a BOF later in the week where they'll be talking about their case statement with a view to getting this set up and running from the next plenary. But there have also been a series of ideas that have come up in the chat about other aspects of work, like the legal interoperability. So what I would like to close with is a discussion about where next, or any other comments on the definition and the typology. So Karen, I don't know if you are able to unmute, screen share, and walk us through your proposal.
Yep. So this is a bit of a preview of the session that's going to be coming on Thursday. Excuse me, just trying to make sure you can see my slides. As part, there was a discussion that came up both through this interest group and through the work that the Canadian government is doing to think about benchmarking in the research commons. And sorry, I'm just going to change the presentation mode. And I'll drop a link to this in the chat window, but we did create a case statement to create a new working group on international benchmarking. And again, I'll put that link in the chat, and it should be open for comments if anyone wants to comment on it. But the general idea is that one of the deliverables from this interest group was to create a roadmap for global integration, and we've decided that one way that we could support that output would be to start looking at benchmarking in the commons. And we have a list, we've identified a draft list of commons that many have already talked about here today. the specific idea was that there would be 2 deliverables from this working group. One would be a non-redundant set of KPIs and success metrics that are currently used in these commons. So, and by that I mean, it's what's being used internally to those commons initiatives to let them know that people are engaging with their systems. So it can be things like the number of data sets downloaded, the number of software packages that were contributed to a GitHub account, the number of cycles in a high performance computing system, whatever it is that internally a system is looking at to see how their system is being used or being engaged with. And so the idea is to go to all of those research commons that we've identified and just look at some of their metrics. And then the second deliverable is a list of international benchmarks of features and structures and functionality that can help define a commons. And by this we mean things like, is there an open data policy that is available to the public? Is there a mechanism or a workflow to add a PID for a particular type of artifact or content type? Is there a mechanism to query a graph, a database to look at the relationship between data and publishers? So this list of features that a GORC, that a research commons could support, I think could be useful again in identifying those areas where maybe we need to do some more work on interoperability, or look at it in terms of fair maturity metrics or a type of maturity model or that type of thing. So that is essentially the preview. That working group is going to be spearheaded by Mark Leggett and myself on Thursday at, I think it's 9 p.m. GMT for those that want to join us. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen and put the link to that document if anyone wants to read it.
Excellent, thanks, Karen. Yeah. Super. So, so this is one activity that's spun out of the interest group so far. I don't know if anyone has questions specifically about this that they'd like to raise just now about the benchmarking activities or potential work you're doing that is relevant to that group. Again, you can raise hands, or we're a small enough group that you can just unmute if you prefer. Just look, I don't see anyone raising specifically about.
Does that mean it's perfect?
Yeah, it's perfect. It means it's approved. I think we can just take on the job of tab and just be like, yeah, okay, tick, job done, set up group. Okay, so we have 25 minutes left. And one thing we'd put for the end, it probably doesn't need 25 minutes, is really where to go next with this. So I mean, you fed back on the definition. We didn't actually go into the typology in too much detail, so we could discuss the typology more concretely if you would like, and go back to Karina's questions because we just had general chat before. But one of the other things we're interested in is where else you think we need to work on. So we did have points raised by Françoise about the metrics, which potentially ties into this group about the benchmarking, or a collaboration with the Fair Data Maturity Model group. We also had the kind of legal aspects coming up, and there may well have been others. I'm trying to just quickly scroll through the shared notes and the chat, but it would be good to get your general feedback. So Françoise, I see your hand's gone up. Do you want to start us off?
Yes, I think, the benchmarking group has a wide remit, my understanding. Mm-hmm. So do you think you would work with specific task force? Because you cannot have everybody studying all the sub aspects. So is it different working groups, or is it one working group with task force? But usually task force are more in interest groups than in working groups in the models we have seen in VRD, but we can always invent something.
Yeah. I mean, I'll let Karen answer for definite, but I think we should just be flexible. I mean, it's been proposed as a working group, but as you say, there are aspects of the remit that you might have certain smaller groups work on. But Karen, do you have a view on?
Sorry, one of the issues, if it is an interest group, is that the idea is to produce RDA recommendations. So,
Yeah, so
this splits for working groups anyway.
yeah, so I think, Karen, you've proposed it as a working group, haven't you? Because you've got specific outputs you want to deliver.
I have, and to Francois's point, there could be in my mind, it would make sense to have subgroups within that working group working on different tasks. And again, you know, I didn't want to, I had an idea about a work plan that would do different things, like making sure that list of commons, you know, we've got a good target list, people that are reviewing public facing documents, reaching out to the commons organizations that are building commons, you know, synthesizing information. So I do think that there could be a suite of task groups associated with that. But I was looking forward to having the group decide the self-organizing of that. But yeah.
Excellent. So
I'm sorry.
yeah, go ahead.
No, I had a question. I think it was Mark had an interesting comment he had earlier about cataloging connections against the topology, and I wonder if he had any thoughts about how that could actually happen. How could we do that?
Are you able to unmute, Mark, and respond to that?
I am able to unmute. Thanks, Karen, for the question, and hello. Well, I can only sort of point to my own experience. I did some work with the New Zealand e-science infrastructure, and we did some benchmarking across 8 different jurisdictions to look at how they organize themselves to deal with things. So that's sort of, you know, you start with a model and then you start interviewing people and see what they do and do not do the same or different, and just capture that. So it's a matter of just, I think the typology, if we could formalize the typology a tiny bit more, you know, what's the question, what are the possible answers, and then you work through the different points of intersection, for example, between IVOA and EOSC, and just explore what things they're doing together and what things they need to be going their separate ways on. I think that will be useful. It'll show the points of opportunity where things are easier to integrate or interoperate, in places where greater effort, for example, on legal interoperability may be a challenge. You know, even the GDPR versus Canadian privacy is an interesting point of friction, which, you know, there are ways of handling it once you've identified it. So anyway, that's my thinking.
Excellent. And there's a question, I assume it might be to you, Mark, from Christoph Bruch, about, is a report about the comparison available? You
mean the one that was done with the New
Zealand one? I'm guessing so.
Yeah, absolutely. I can. We'll try to connect. I can send it to you. It's not public, but it's being shared. And in fact, ARDC, if you look at the ARDC diagram, the way they've broken things up, that actually builds on the e-research framework that we put together for New Zealand. So that's actually a reflection of a slightly earlier version of that set of blocks.
Excellent. Okay. And actually, so one thing that Mark's been involved in, there was at the EGI conference last week, there was a workshop around the Global Open Science Commons. And I think, you know, I think there you're looking at some of the technical implementation aspects. I think there could, again, be some nice dovetailing between this initiative and the work you do there.
Sure. Happy to help when I can.
Yeah.
Just a quick program note, Karen, you mentioned a BOF on Wednesday. I didn't see it in the schedule. Is that special private BOF with a...
It's the speakeasy of Box. No, it's on Thursday on the at 1.
It's the last session, I think.
Is it? Yeah, that's
I think Ian. Here we go. I'm gonna drop it in the chat. It's Thursday at 9. But I'll pop it in the chat for everybody. And I see there was a comment from Bob Hainish. It's important to consider the cost benefit analysis. Integration of science commons needs to be driven by science use cases. Actually, Bob, you've put your video on. Do you want to speak to this?
Well, just briefly, I mean, I'm all for international integration and commons and everything, but having worked in astronomy closely with Francoise and now working closely with materials scientists, for example, integrating data collections and science commons across these two fields would probably not lead to a lot of new science because they're just so disparate and serve such disparate user communities. So we need to choose carefully the problems that we want to tackle, lest we invent solutions to problems that nobody wants to solve. So that was it.
Yeah, no, that's a very good point. I think this often happens in our field that, you know, we're driven by a vision rather than actual practical use cases. And then there can be a lot of build it and the people don't come, and we have to really be driven by the scientists' needs.
Yeah.
Juan, do you want to ask a question or comment?
Yeah, very much along the same lines as Bob's comment, actually. What's been bugging me is the sheer scale of this and knowing where to start. Having spent a few years working on EOSC now, that itself is an enormous thing, and this is even bigger. So for me, it's really, and another thing to note is that the different initiatives we're talking about, they are quite different in flavor, some of them are. So I think for me, it's really finding those areas of overlap where there is a real driver to do something that is needed, and just narrow it down and do a few small things to start with, rather than worrying too much about the great big vision. So really, I think a combination of what Bob's saying about narrowing down to something that's really needed, and also taking the intersection of what all the different initiatives are doing. I suggest that that's where we start.
Yeah, no, I think that's very pragmatic and helpful advice, because I also have worried about the scale of this, because effectively this interest group is like all of RDA, you know, it's like all of these different initiatives that are happening. And I think this is why we wanted to, you know, have the interest group really as a holder or a container for discussion in this space, but really to be focusing, you know, on certain working group activities addressing, you know, small aspects of that puzzle, and really to have this kind of facilitation and coordination role. And I think, I mean, one thing that's come out of the EOSC work for me from the FAIR working group perspective is work we've been doing around persistent identifiers. So defining the policy there, thinking about the implementation of that. And we got a lot of international feedback on the policy. And I think there's a lot of, you know, the infrastructure that's needed is global. So I think there could be one or two concrete things that are done. And similarly, there could be certain science use cases that we pick up on. So thinking about the collaboration, I always forget if it's escape or expands, but the one that's astronomy and other domains looking together, that again could be something that could be looked on broader than EOSC. So escape, thanks, Karina. Thanks, Francoise. Okay, so other comments or questions? We have 15 minutes left, or we could all just have a very early coffee break.
Sarah,
You're all silent. Karen, yeah.
Yeah, sorry. This is there a plan for this next interest group meeting, or are we?
Sorry, how do you mean, like for like the chairs, for like the work we've been doing as chairs, kind of pushing the group, or
all of that? Like I didn't know if there was a standing day. You know, sorry, maybe this has already been settled, but was there a standing meeting? I know that's something that, you know, the working group's going to talk about, but what about the container, the interest group? Is there a...
So far, actually, so I must admit we've been a little bit remiss as chairs of this group, following like the Melbourne plenary when we'd first got set up. We haven't been doing things as like a full interest group. So the chairs have been meeting and have been working on the definition and the typology, but we haven't run sessions with the wider group. And I think that's something that we have to move to do, not just at plenaries, because it's too fragmented to just discuss this every 6 months. So I think we do need some more regular discussion, and that's something that we definitely should discuss with all the chairs to figure out how to do that. Hilary, I don't know if you want to come in on that point.
Yeah, well, we we wanted to try and facilitate that a bit more, actually, because we do realize that it's harder. So part of that could be what I mentioned before, Sarah, about like trying to help you with some effort to coordinate that part. And also then the Secretariat we have recently purchased a webinar and all meetings, channels, Mentimeter, all that sort of thing to facilitate the in-between, because it's great to have the plenary meetings, but if we want to keep the momentum, we should do that. So I think you could very happily write to the Secretariat, Sarah, or Bridget, and myself, and we will make sure to.
And it would be good, actually, if people who are here, because it's great to see so many people attending and engaging, it'd be good if you let us know what works for you. I mean, I personally find Zooms like this work very well for discussion. And actually, it was really good with the Menti tonight to actually get feedback from all of you quite easily. But let us know what works best, and we can coordinate, regular interest group meetings. And I see David, Benjamin, you've put your video on. Do you want to raise a comment or question? Oh, you're muted still.
I just had a question, wanting to have some recommendations as the best way to just get a real overview of what you all are doing, and to be able to figure out how, what the general landscape is, so I can figure out if there's places for me to plug in.
Yeah, completely. I think this is one of the things that's quite difficult sometimes with RDA, because there's so many interest groups and working groups. So one thing I would recommend is, like, if it's your first plenary, like looking at the plenary pathways to work your way through. This group is a very, very broad based group. So it's kind of covering, all aspects of data sharing, exchange, interoperability. So if, I don't know what your background is, but if you're involved in work that's around kind of building the infrastructure and sharing within a national context or international, then I think this is a useful group, because it's very overarching. But then there are many other interest groups and working groups that will drill down into specific areas like persistent identifiers or legal aspects or skills and training, and the curriculum development that's needed for researchers or for data stewards. I think at this plenary, there's some groups around things like professionalizing data stewardship. And there are also a number of groups that either focus on a particular discipline or domain, like engineering or health sciences groups. And also there are like national groups. So I don't know if you're based in the States, there is RDA US, which can, give you that kind of national picture as well. The best way to kind of get to know about the groups, every interest group and working group has a case statement. So in ours, you can see specifically, what our remit is. What is it that we're trying to achieve with this group? And when it's a working group, they have a set lifespan. It's either 12 or 18 months. So you can really see a timeline of what will be delivered when. And that can give you a good sense of how you can engage in that group. But RDA is a very kind of participatory place. So as well as like looking at the groups and thinking, okay, this aligns with some work I'm doing, please do volunteer and encourage ideas. So if you have something that you think this is a good fit, either as a science use case for this group, or I have a case study or example that would be relevant to a certain group, volunteer it to the chairs, or even put yourself forward as an active member of groups. And that's the best way. I always find you get the most from RDA when you're active in groups. So it can be hard at first to navigate and find the right home for your work, but it's worth persevering, because then you really build some useful collaborations, and the work that you do then has much bigger international impact and uptake.
Awesome. So yeah, I'm working on some technology that would basically enable people to connect information on web pages. So basically creating the ability to create, I call it a bridge from a piece of content on one page to a piece of content on another page with a relationship. And it's all in the annotation layer.
Excellent. Okay, so there are a number of groups that are looking at annotations or metadata and, like semantic linking. So I think there'll be kind of several areas that are relevant there.
Okay, so just take a look at the working groups, and they might even say that within their charter about annotation.
Yeah, no, it's certainly within their charters or their case statements they'd mention that. And also it's good. Well, it depends if it's an interest group or a working group, whether it's called a charter or a case statement. I think one of these funny terminology issues. But there is also a group. Well, there's RDA for newcomers. And there's a group, early career engagement, where people act as mentors and help people navigate RDA. So they're both good places to go and ask questions and have people help point you in the right direction.
All right.
And I think there's a number of, I haven't actually gone through the full program because it's been busy this last week, but there's a number of social drop-ins as well, which again is a very good way to, make connections and get people to point you to relevant contacts.
Great. Thanks so much, Sarah.
No worries. Gabby, did you want to raise a question?
Well, I just wanted to tell David that he can go to the main page of RDA, and there's in every group they have a kind of a resume of what the group does, because as you say, Sarah, is sometimes it's difficult just to get involved, and because you are doing this for a while, and then it's hard to see how we can get, even if we do the same things as you do. But I think little by little we can go into the groups, and especially like in the case of Latin America, we have a lot of people that are not that comfortable in English.
Yeah.
And sometimes people, even if they speak, they kind of feel that they will not be understood, or they will not understand things like that. But I think you can navigate by in the RDA main page, where you can go to groups, and when you go to groups, that give you all the groups and the abstract of what they do.
And one thing I've just popped in the chat, actually, there's a kind of filter that you can use. It's RDA for you. And there you can filter like topics that you're interested in, or domains, expertise, like certain research areas. And then it will tell you the relevant groups. And a little bit on the kind of terminology of what you'll see in the plenary, there are BOF sessions, which are essentially new ideas. They aren't yet groups. So actually Karen's idea is a BOF. It's being proposed as a group, and it's about soliciting feedback and getting people involved. So if you see BOF sessions on the program, they're definitely groups that are easier to engage in because they haven't actually yet started. And then you have interest groups, which are essentially long-standing groups that are really about being a container or a holder for a topic of particular interest, which doesn't go away. So things around like training and skills, for example, or like this, the Global Open Research Commons, that's going to be a long-standing issue. And then there are working groups, and probably the working groups are the hardest to engage with in some sense, because they have a very defined focused remit, and they only run for either 12 or 18 months. So if a working group is, in the last 6 months, they're already very advanced. So it's quite hard to come and follow that discussion. But that can kind of help you navigate the plenary program a little bit and choose what to see.
Yes, and another recommendation that is what we are doing in Costa Rica, and especially in our university, Universidad Nacional, is we are getting a lot of instructions, a lot of we are with the data school, and we have been working with Foster to do some of the capacity building, because it's a new language. And it's a new way of doing our practice of research. Then you have to begin to think a little bit differently. And you have to be able to get involved with a lot of the issues that already some people have already dealt with. And building capacity is very important. Then I recommend to countries that are new in this practice of open data and open science is to begin by building capacities.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think the RDA is a great place to meet people and to build that capacity. There's a lot of expertise here, so do join the socials and connect with people as you have done just now. Yeah. So thank you very much for the question. I think that's a useful one for many people because RDA can be a little bit nebulous and hard to follow at first. So thanks very much, David.
Thank you both.
So we have a couple of minutes left. Does anyone else want to make any final remarks or comments or questions? If not, I may buy us all back a few minutes extra dinner time. I'm starving, so I'm definitely ready for my dinner. But thank you all so much for attending and for contributing to that session. And also to Karen and Karina, obviously, as co-organizers here. As we mentioned, we do have a session at the end of the week on the international benchmarking. So please do join that if you can. And if not, I'm sure we will see you through the week at various things, the 5K run or the social drop-in or book chat or whatever else is ahead of us. And thank you very much. Bye-bye, everybody.